Welcome to Wally's World. My name is Liam. If you do not know me, I am I like to read a lot. I like to write a lot. I'm an entrepreneur. I own a fitness coaching business, purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and I'm currently writing a book. Today I'm going to be talking about the dissolving of the ego. And so I'm going to split it up into three parts. First, I'm going to describe what the ego is. Second, I'm going to answer why you would even want to dissolve an ego. And three, how to dissolve it. For context, I am currently on let's see if this looks better. Yeah, it looks a little better. I'm currently on a 72-hour water fast. And as a disclaimer, do not do this. Definitely do it safely. All right? There, I got my disclaimer in. So, what is the ego? It's actually very misunderstood. Let me preface by saying that every human has an ego. The ego is the construction of your past experiences. The ego is who you think you are. And you are much more. So I'll talk about that later. But the ego, let me give you an example of something that builds up your ego and might flare it up. Let's say, so as a kid, I personally had acne on my face. And that popped up around 7th grade. And then I would go on to do Accutane. And I would do Accutane. I did Accutane my sophomore year of high school. So where the ego comes in is I built an identity. This is another synonym. Identity, ego, they are synonyms. And you might not know that. We think that ego is this derogatory term, but it's not. That is one misconception, is that the ego is a bad thing. The ego is what keeps you alive. Your ego is what makes you go and grab food when you're hungry. So, back to the acne example. I had acne when I was younger. And so I built up this identity because I had these painful moments where I thought the acne was forever. And I thought that the acne was me, when really the acne was something I just attributed to my ego. And where the ego comes in is I set this quest in life to get rid of my acne. I did a number of different diets. I did an apple cleanse, so I ate only apples for 3 days, thinking that would maybe balance hormones or something. That did not work. I also had to put an enema. You know what you do with those. Not cool. I had to do that. And then I would go on to do a diet where I ate according to my blood type. So I'd look at an app. Oh, pork doesn't align with your blood type. You can't eat that. I was dairy-free and gluten-free at the same time. So I had these three massive barriers. I also was running cross-country. So I was 140 pounds at 5'11" and 16 years old. And for reference, right now, I'm about 175 to 170. And so I was doing these things. I was trying a bunch of topical regimens as well. Nothing was working. And I was in so much pain because of my ego. And one thing, as I describe the ego, you'll notice is that all of your pain is related to this ego, this identity. Typically, pain comes up when you think something hurts your identity, your idea of it. And so acne for me just didn't fit into this identity I had. The identity I had was, I am a good-looking person. That's who I am. That's my ego. My ego is a good-looking person My identity is a good-looking person who does not have acne. And so for this thing to be on my face that doesn't coincide with this identity I've created brings me so much pain. All the while, I would go into school and everyone had their own ego, their own conflicts internally that they fought with. But I thought the entire world revolved around my ego. That's one of the main characteristics. The ego is this pain body inside of you that is so convinced that the world is completely against it. And any urge to defend yourself in an argument, any urge to get mad at someone who cuts you off in traffic, any urge to achieve anything, as crazy as it sounds, these are all parts of an ego. They're just the result of your ego, otherwise known as who you think you are. That's the ego. So I said earlier that the ego is this thing that is important. It's something that we all have. If we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't survive. There would be no desire to fend for ourselves. We wouldn't go out and kill animals. We certainly wouldn't have political disputes. We certainly wouldn't have arguments even. And a very simple example of something without an ego it is most animals. Think about a deer in the wild. It's not operating under the same consciousness we are. You probably know that we have a larger brain than a deer. So we have a broadened, a higher consciousness than the deer. Pretty simple. The deer does not think. If you've ever been chased in maybe hide and seek, or if you've ever been really scared, you zap into this moment where you cannot think. Let's say you're sitting down in the movie theater and it's about 30 minutes in and the scariest scene of the movie hits. It's a clown that just pops out of nowhere. That split second where you feel that, oh, that is one moment where your ego is completely gone. You have no thought of what you're doing. Similarly, if you've ever been chased or if you've ever been in a life or death situation, that is a moment when you're absent of ego, and animals, for the most part, live in a state like that. And if you go to the contrary, so if we were constantly in that state, life would be horrible. We would be constantly on edge in this fight or flight moment. So it's quite cool that we're able to switch between nervous system, the parasympathetic, which is the rest in your digest nervous system when you feel calm, and then the sympathetic, which is your survival, fight or flight. We have these two systems. So what am I getting at here? Hopefully that gives you some idea of what the ego is. Where problems arise, I've said that the ego is necessary. Where problems arise, though, is when we act out of our ego without even knowing it. That is exactly what an argument is. If you are in any way entangled in an argument, you are being controlled by something that is not you. For that reason alone, seek to free yourself. Why would you want to be controlled by something that's not in your control? And the reason you're being controlled in an argument is because you think you're in control. The best sell is one that people don't even know that they're in. That's what the ego is. It has this it has these bars around you that you just cannot see, because you've created within your jail cell. You put your posters up, you got your fancy car, whatever it is. You build up these things that make you feel like you have all this control, but then you get in traffic and you start flipping off the guy in front of you. You do not have control if you're doing that without knowing it. And so it's quite funny when people realize, oh crap, there's this thing inside of my brain that is leading me more than I know. Not a bad thing. But the first thing is, I've just described what that is. Hopefully I did it successfully enough to make the point, and hopefully that's understandable. But the ego is who you think you are, and any argument, any amount of pain, any attachment to a version of your past, any desire of the future, it's all ego. So you could make a massive leap in your life by just watching this video and realizing, okay, I have this ego inside of my head, and it's controlling me. Every argument, you have an opportunity to slightly dissolve the ego. So my second point, why would you dissolve the ego? Point number 2. You want to dissolve the ego for a few reasons, really. The first things first, you have the ability to enjoy every single moment in your life if you don't get rid of your ego, but you simply become aware of the ego. So it's not that you get in an argumentative situation with your girlfriend and no longer feel any emotion toward it, but rather you have control of it and you notice it. So instead of like before when you would get angry and then just scream, now you feel the angry emotions, but the difference is that you notice that they're there, and then you get to choose how you act past that. That's why you would want to dissolve the ego. Another example would be, perhaps you've built up a desire. Remember I said that anytime you get mad, any desire you have of the future, that's the ego. Well, so a lot of times we go on desiring things that we don't actually want. We just blindly follow the ego. All desire is ego. So you want to have the autonomy to choose your desires, do you not? If you blindly follow a desire, let's say you wanted for some reason, you wanted a pink F-350 truck, and blindly led by your ego, you built up this massive desire in your head that this pink truck was it. Once you got this pink truck, life was complete. And so you go on working 3 jobs, you suffer for a whole decade, and you get this pink truck, and it's ecstatic. It feels great at first. And then a month and a half goes by, and you've just reached a new normal. How does that feel? You feel very lost. That's why athletes most often, they build up in their head via their ego this form of the future where they finally win that championship, and then they win it, and they're more lost than they've ever been. And then they typically find a path that is much more true to themselves only after they've gotten the thing that they want. And they have just freed themselves from the ego at that point, but only after it could be half of their life comprised of suffering under the delusion that this achievement would free themselves from it. And so you can free yourself right now is the thing. And then I'm not saying desire is bad. I'm not under that notion. I don't think that it's bad to have desire. I think it's good to have one overarching desire that you have chosen. That's the distinction I'm making. You want a desire that you have deliberately thought about and chosen and weighed out the pros and cons. You are willingly handing over your happiness temporarily throughout the day, whatever it is, the work you have to put in, a big goal, for instance, becoming a millionaire, that is something that should be chosen deliberately. Whereas the ego can go on and create this mystical, fantastical version of your future where you get $1 million and think that it frees you. But you hear every millionaire say, it's about the journey, it's about the process. The delusion that any achievement, anything in the external world, getting a girlfriend, getting a car, getting a job, winning a championship, these are all delusions. But they can be good delusions if you've chosen it. If you know before chasing it that this is something you are willing to suffer for. That gives you complete control. And so that's why you would want to work to dissolve the ego, even if just slightly. I use dissolve because it's kind of a catchy title, but even so, it's sort of what we're doing. And so I'm going to give you, although there are many ways and also few ways at the same time, I'm just going to talk about what it looks like to dissolve the ego. How do you do it? So this is essentially what every Buddhist practice or any spiritual practice is attempting to do. It's trying to get rid or get control of this ego. In short, dissolving the ego is just knowing that it's there. You've already done it. Because past that point, you're making a choice. So an example of this is, let's say someone's being an absolute dick to you. Let's say it's your girlfriend. Your girlfriend yells at you every single time you go and hang out with your boys. You come home and she's like, "You don't care about me. I hate you. You're ugly." So you tell her how this makes you feel when she does this. And a good girlfriend, one that has control of their own ego, which let me keep talking. If your girlfriend had control of her ego, you would bring up this unsettling behavior from her and you would tell her how you feel. And if she was unaware of it, cool. You've just made her aware. You've just told her how this dispute makes you feel. And so now that she is aware, now that she knows what her behavior does, she's making a deliberate choice in the future to continue that action. So past awareness, you have choice. You have control. So to make yourself aware is to gain control. Before she was aware, you could accept an apology and you could say, "I forgive you." It's the repeated behavior where you've brought it up, she's now aware, and she's still doing the same thing. That's a pattern, and she's making a choice. So how do you dissolve the ego? That's what I'm getting at. You must notice it's there. And so I guess the example I just gave might give you a example of why it's important to notice it's there. But you want to start to value your anger differently. So you need to start reframing your mind, and you need to start using negative emotions as an opportunity to grow. That's very simply what spirituality in general is. It's a very misunderstood area of knowledge where we think it's crazy shit sitting and meditating. At the end of the day, it is just gaining control and freeing yourself from needless negative emotions. And there's an alchemy that takes place where you are transferring and you're taking negative emotions and turning them into positive ones. So the way you start to dissolve the ego is by seeing negative emotions as an opportunity for growth. And you start with the smallest of sorts because these are the easiest ones to notice. So Michael Singer, great book called The Untethered Soul. I've referenced it on the channel quite a bit. He talks about using these small instances to work on yourself, and then eventually you can work on these bigger moments. So what's an example of a smaller moment? Traffic. Driving is the ultimate chance to work on yourself and dissolve the ego, as we're calling it. You're driving in traffic and someone cuts you off. It happens almost every time you get in the car. Someone will do something that will even slightly rub you the wrong way and evoke a negative emotion. You can get in right before you start driving, get in your car and say, today, I'm not going to get mad while I'm driving. And it's not that you won't feel mad, it's just that you won't entertain the madness. So you get in your car, you say, today I'm not going to do this bullshit. I'm going to grow today. And you will just kind of turn on your awareness at this point. Because otherwise you would get mad, you would become that emotion, you would take it and run. But today you get in the car and you say, I'm going to grow today. So you're driving down the street, 5 minutes later, someone turns their blinker on and swerves in front of you. You feel these emotions you would normally feel in this situation, but instead you verbalize and you say, whatever. Saying whatever is one of the most beneficial things you can do. Saying whatever is verbal permission to let go. We say let go all the time, but we don't really make it actionable. One of the most actionable ways to start letting go is when you think about something that you cannot let go of, you say whatever. And in that moment, you give your brain permission to move on to the next thing. And that's exactly what you start to do in traffic. But the biggest part of this process is even just knowing that you got mad. Most people don't even think that they got mad. Sure, they might call their friend and be like, oh, this fucker just cut me off in traffic. Screw this guy. That might occur, but they don't realize how stupid of an energy waste that is. And so day by day, you start turning these small moments into opportunities for growth. And then there comes a point where you may be in a relationship, it could be toxic, where you just no longer feed these arguments. And there's an interesting process that takes place when someone starts trying to grow in this way, where prior, both parties involved would take part in this battle, this verbal battle. And they both got a kick out of it. They both actually enjoyed it while thinking that they hated it. A toxic relationship is two egos completely fired up. It is one of the most egoic things is the pleasure-pain cycle, which is, for example, let's say you want to attain a certain amount of money in your bank account. It's a pleasure-pain cycle. You go through a bunch of pain, doing a bunch of stuff that you do not want to do to obtain one moment of pleasure, and then you repeat the cycle. The same thing occurs in a relationship. You argue, and once the argument's over, it feels like the relationship has been recreated brand new, and it's something that you can do over and over and over again. But it is comprised of 90% pain, 10% pleasure. Do you really want to lead your life like that when you could more so be 100% peace? That is why you'd want to dissolve the ego, just gain control of it. But the process that takes place in a relationship is one person may start to work on themselves in this way. They start not getting mad in traffic, and they start to become aware that they're getting mad in these arguments, and they just simply do not want that anymore. And then the other party, let's say I'm the boyfriend, I have a girlfriend, I no longer get mad in arguments like I used to. The girlfriend will start to question this. And she'll say, it will actually fire her up that you are not playing along with the ego battle. And she'll say things like, you just don't even care about me. That is a statement backed by the ego. So at first, when you start working on yourself, it will make people around you whom you used to partake egotistically, it will start to make those people uncomfortable. Why is that? Because you're pointing out in themselves a problem they have with their own ego. So at first, awareness, just knowing that this thing is controlling you, is very painful. Because I called it the pain body earlier. Imagine becoming aware of your ego is like shining a light on it. The ego lives in the dark. If you shine a light on an ego, it gets pissed. It's like a vampire coming outside. It's like, oh my God. That's your awareness on the ego. And that's the dissolving. That's why it's called a dissolving. So, in summary, the ego is this necessary thing. It's what keeps you alive. It's what keeps you self-centered enough to go and eat food, to go to bed, etc. Why would you dissolve it? Because you want to free yourself. You want to gain control. You don't want to live your life 90% pain, 10% pleasure, with the delusion that some type of pleasure of which you haven't attained will free you from this process. That's the delusion. And how do you dissolve it? Well, you just notice it, and you start with little things, and it builds up over time. And each time you get mad but don't feed the ego, you're growing. It'll be a little bit easier the next time. And then you start to be able to handle massive, typically damaging moments in your life. And death is one of those inevitable moments where if you have worked on yourself enough, you're going to be able to handle a death, whether it's your own death, a person in your family, a friend. You're going to be able to handle that much better than a person who has not done these things. Because the ego likes to think that things are forever, but they are not. And that's something you notice about the ego. Again, it's all just about noticing certain things. It's not very complex. You just come to notice negative emotions and think to yourself, do I want to feel this way? There is a version of you that does not get mad, that is at peace at all times. Peace is happiness at rest. Happiness is peace in motion. A peaceful person has the ability to be happy when the opportunity is present. But you really want to attain peace first. And you do that by getting control of your ego. Hope this was helpful. Another way it'll be painful, but a fast with no phone, if you can do that safely, will make you harshly aware of things that are led by your ego. It will make you feel lonely. Okay, that is your ego. It will make you feel hungry. Big surprise. Not only is that a biological process, but that is somewhat ego. Your ego actually finds a lot of comfort in food. That's one thing about it. When you remove it, you start to see parts of your ego that you didn't know were there. And again, the ego is a necessity, but you want to know that it's there. Hope this was helpful. I adore this YouTube channel, and I hope someone found this helpful.